Yeah, so in 1993, when the IRA really switched tactics and started to aim the target, if you like, at the economy as opposed to people, the insurance industry found that it could no longer cover the type of attack that was taking place because it was no longer fortuitous, it was not predictable, and there was a human element. It wasn't a fortuitous act. And so the insurance industry had to withdraw cover, which of course would have meant that banks would stop lending money, construction companies would stop building buildings, and the government couldn't allow that to happen because obviously the terrorists would win. And so there was a joint venture, a public-private partnership between the insurance industry and the government to make sure that the money could get to business, to keep business on its feet the day after an attack, and that money would come from the government and using Pool Re as a mechanism to distribute that money. Now over time, of course, Pool Re's built up its own assets despite having paid out on 16 different losses. It's never drawn down on the government or the taxpayer. It's now built up an asset base of about £6.5 billion. Add to that the reinsurance that we buy from the global markets, and you have resilience against terror attack in this country, property damage terror attack, for about £10 billion, which is obviously quite a sizable event. Yeah, so after 9/11, the same thing happened in other countries around the world where countries decided they could no longer provide that kind of insurance because of the sort of catastrophic size of the loss in 9/11. And so these kind of mechanisms, different kinds of models, some more state, some less state, some pre-funded, some post-funded, sprung up around the world. And in the UK, our cover was extended to cover CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological and nuclear. And about 14 other nations around the world have similar schemes in place now between the public and the private partnership. I think what frightens us, if you like, is the speed at which the threat is now evolving. So in 20 odd years of existence, it was property damage, it was the sort of truck bomb, possibly an aeroplane, the sort of catastrophic type black swan type event. What's happening now really is much more low sophistication, low value type of loss, but equally causing huge amounts of fear and panic, but of course now impacting a different sector of the economy, namely small business. So you've got two issues. One was the rise in the potential gap in cover because of the fact that we excluded cyber, and the fact of the matter is that it is now possible to cause damage from remote digital interference. In other words, you can cause physical damage, fire, explosion using a computer remotely. But also, what's happened now is you've got a situation where small businesses who are perhaps not the targets themselves of an attack, but who may be close to an iconic location. London Bridge, obviously, London Borough Market, very close to London Bridge, very close to the Shard, and there isn't damage, but there is significant business interruption and therefore financial loss to those small businesses. And that financial loss is in the sort of hundreds of thousands and very small low millions, as it were. But if you're a small business, that's catastrophic. And that's excluded from cover, and that needs to be addressed. So you've got cyber issues, you've got non-damage business interruption issues. We've succeeded in amending our cover from the 1st of April to include cyber, and we're in active discussions with the government about including non-damage business interruption. I certainly don't see that. I don't see the threat reducing as a result of winning the physical battle. I think it just displaces the battle. I heard one of the speakers here at this fantastic exposition talk about the fact that you can't defeat an ideology by arresting it. I thought it was a really good analogy. So I think in the physical terrorism space, it will manifest itself. You've not only got now jihadism, you've also got far-right extremism. In the past, it was all about Al-Qaeda. Today, you've probably got 17 or 18 different types of threat actor. That includes Irish republicanism, which is still alive. In the cyber world, it's a much harder question to answer because, of course, you don't know who carried out an attack. So you've got the attribution question. Was it a young child in his bedroom just doing it for fun? Was it a disgruntled employee? Was it a terrorist? Was it a criminal? And that attribution issue makes the much harder to decide whether the coverage kicks in terms of, obviously we're covering terrorism as opposed to criminality. But on the other hand, if it's state-sponsored, how do you know that the terrorist was state-sponsored? Again, often we don't. And so that attribution issue is going to be challenging in the future. I think it's going to be more and more critical. I think in the past, the security service has done a phenomenal job of interdicting the spectacular loss. And there's a variety of reasons as to why they've been successful, which I'm sure they know better than I do. But once you get into low sophistication of somebody renting a vehicle or buying a bread knife out of Robert Dyer's, how do you stop that? And I think the only way you can do that is a public-private engagement, so that the government engages with the private sector. The government has got, I don't know how many police there are on the streets of London or in the streets of any major city around the country, but there are probably 10 to 1 in terms of security personnel working for large corporations or big private shops, and those people have got to be engaged in the fight against terrorism, as well as in implementing protective security, whether that's concrete bollards, CCTV, counter-terrorism measures in terms of plastic film on windows. So the private sector has a role to play in a way that perhaps it didn't in the past. I think it's been absolutely fascinating, both from the opportunity to get the message out and actually to have an opportunity here to have a platform to give a talk about terrorism insurance, which is not a widely known about or even understood subject, but also just to walk around and see the different types of stall holders that there are here, the different types of technology that are existing, the way in which, as much as the threat is evolving, the countermeasures are evolving just as fast, which is great news. And I think one of the things that insurance can do is to incentivize the implementation of those measures by educating the businessman to implement them and giving him a corresponding reduction on his premium, so that he's incentivized to implement the security that he would do on his house by putting an alarm on it, for example, or on his shop by putting a sprinkler in it.